General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, January 14th reveal that Valentine had always believed he understood Spoon Island better than anyone. Its winding corridors, its unstable cliffs, its shifting shadows that seemed to breathe with every gust of wind from the surrounding waters. But the island was changing. It was no longer simply a sanctuary of secrets. It had become a labyrinth filled with traps, some intentional and some born from decay. And Valentine discovered this truth the hard way when he nearly plunged to his death. One storm-soaked night, the ground beneath him gave way without warning, a chunk of earth collapsing under the weight of too many years of neglect, and too many hidden passageways rotting beneath the surface. In that split second, as his body lurched forward, his hands scraping against damp stone, Valentine felt something rare for him: panic. The kind that strikes from the gut, cold and uncontrollable. It was as if the island itself was turning against him, punishing him for the ghosts he carried and the dangers he continued to attract. He managed to catch himself at the edge of the cliff, his fingers clinging to jagged rock as the ocean roared below. His heart hammered violently, and for a moment he wasn't sure whether he was reacting to the near fall or to the realization that this was no mere accident. Someone or something had manipulated the terrain. Too much erosion in one place to precise a weak point. The island had always been treacherous, but this felt orchestrated, deliberate. Valentine pulled himself to safety, his breath shaking as he looked back at the splintered earth. That moment triggered a shift inside him, a new obsession forming in the back of his mind. The island was no longer just dangerous. It was watching him. It wanted something from him, or perhaps it wanted him gone entirely. And that realization became the seed of a growing paranoia that he tried to dismiss, but could not escape. Unbeknownst to him, Ava had seen everything from a distance. She had only stepped onto the terrace for a moment of fresh air, but the sight of Valentine struggling at the edge of the cliff froze her blood. Ava wasn't supposed to be on the island long. Her visit was unplanned, driven by instinct and unease. But the moment she witnessed his near fall, she understood something had shifted. This wasn't an accident. Spoon Island had become a battlefield of hidden agendas, and Valentine was now at the center of the storm. Ava watched him pull himself up, and something flickered in her expression, not concern exactly, but recognition. Valentine may have been unpredictable, manipulative, and at times cruel, yet he did not deserve to be hunted by the very ground he walked on. Ava knew danger too intimately to mistake this for fate. Her discovery became one of the newest adjustments in the ever-evolving chaos surrounding Windermere. Ava wasn't sure whether she should reveal what she had seen to anyone, not to Laura, not to Sonny, not even to Valentine himself. But the image of him clinging to the cliff replayed in her mind with disturbing clarity, mixing with her own memories of the island's silent violence. Spoon Island had always been a place where secrets breathed harder than the people who kept them. But now it felt alive with malice. And that malice was growing bolder. Valentine, still shaken from the encounter, tried to regain control of his thoughts. He paced the halls of Windermere, listening to the creaks and groans of the structure he once considered an extension of himself. He couldn't ignore the feeling that the island's traps, whether natural or man-made, were tightening around him. It felt like a punishment, a warning, or perhaps a message from an enemy who knew the island as intimately as he did. The paranoia that began at the cliffside took root, spreading like a shadow across his every step. What if the island was not only unsafe, but actively being used against him? What if someone had turned Spoon Island into a maze designed to consume him? Meanwhile, Ava struggled with her own internal conflict. She had never been afraid to let someone else fall if it served her survival. But this time felt different. She sensed that Valentine's near accident was a sign of a larger danger, one that could sweep through Spoon Island and everyone connected to it. Her accidental sighting of him wasn't just a coincidence, it was a warning. And the fact that she had been the only witness meant she held a piece of the unfolding narrative, whether she wanted it or not. This moment became a catalyst, a subtle yet powerful shift that set new tensions into motion. Ava now carried knowledge Valentine didn't realize she possessed, and Valentine carried a growing suspicion that the island was hiding new threats beneath its crumbling surface. The near accident wasn't just a scare, it was the beginning of a new obsession for Valentine, one that would drive him deeper into danger. For Ava, it was the spark of a decision she didn't know she would soon have to make: whether to warn him or let the island claim what it seemed so eager to take. And as Spoon Island continued to shift under their feet, both Ava and Valentine sensed the truth. Neither wanted to admit the real threat was no longer coming. It was already here. Brad sought out Jason with a determination that was impossible to ignore, a tension pulsing beneath every step he took. He wasn't the kind of man who confronted Jason Morgan lightly, no one was. But tonight he had reached the point where fear outweighed caution. When he finally stood in front of Jason, there was no hesitation, no wavering, just pure urgency as he delivered the request he had been rehearsing over and over in his mind. Jason needed to stay away from Britt. Completely. Immediately. Absolutely. The words struck harder than Brad expected, but he pushed forward because he knew this wasn't about pride, jealousy, or some misplaced sense of ownership. This was about the growing sense of danger swallowing Britt's world, a danger Brad could feel with every instinct he had. He may not have been a hero, and he certainly had no illusions of being able to fight Brennan or Sidwell on his own, but he knew how to recognize a threat, and Britt was drowning in them. Jason, for all his strength, only made her more of a target. This confrontation marked one of the clearest adjustments unfolding in Port Charles. Brad had always tried to protect Britt in his own messy, sometimes misguided way, but the tone of his warning signaled something new. He wasn't just asking Jason to step back. He was begging him to recognize the storm forming around Britt. Every step she took was shadowed by the tightening influence of Brennan and Sidwell. And Jason's presence, his connection, his affection, his history was a weapon waiting to be used against her. Brad understood that even if Jason didn't. Jason, hearing the demand, felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long while, someone was calling him out not for what he had done, but for what he could cause simply by being who he was. He wanted to argue, to dismiss Brad's fears as exaggerations, but deep down he knew they weren't. Brennan had already shown a disturbingly precise understanding of people's vulnerabilities, and Sidwell had proven he had no boundaries. Both men had targeted the weak points in the Corinthos and Casadini circles with surgical precision. Britt was not just vulnerable, she was visible, easy to exploit, easy to hurt. The realization clawed at Jason slowly, a cold weight settling into his chest. Brad's warning wasn't just a plea. It was a reminder of the exact thing Jason had spent years trying to accept, that sometimes the people he cared about suffered simply because they were close to him. He had lost too many people that way. Too many scars, too many graves, too many regrets to count. And now, hearing Brad speak Britt's name with such desperation, he felt that old wound begin to bleed again. Brad pressed further, sensing Jason's silence. He explained how Britt had been receiving strange calls, how she seemed constantly on edge, how she confessed feeling like she was being watched even when she was alone. He described the shift in her voice, the tremble she tried to hide, the way she clutched her phone with both hands as if waiting for the next blow. She had never said Brennan or Sidwell directly, but Brad knew better. This was the same pattern, the same darkness, the same suffocating pressure she had endured before but amplified. This wasn't fear she could outrun. It was fear hunting her. Hearing that, Jason felt a pulse of rage, hot, instantaneous, uncontrollable, but Brad wasn't done. He leaned in, lowering his voice, as if the shadows around them might be listening. He told Jason that Britt's feelings for him weren't hidden anymore. Not from Brad, not from anyone paying attention. And those feelings, if pushed any further, would become ammunition Brennan and Sidwell could use. They wouldn't just go after Britt physically, they would weaponize her heart. And Jason knew that was true. He had seen men like Brennan twist emotional connections into nooses. Brad's plea became heavier, colder, sharper. If Jason stayed close, Britt would end up hurt. If Jason pulled away, she might have a chance. It was the cruelest kind of choice, the one that tore through Jason's chest with the precision of a blade. He cared for Britt more deeply than he had allowed himself to admit. But caring had a cost, and Brad was pointing it out with brutal clarity. If Jason loved her at all, he would stay away. The painful contradiction hung between them. Choosing Britt meant losing her. For Jason, this moment became one of the biggest shifts in his personal narrative. He had always believed he could protect the people he loved through strength, vigilance, and sacrifice. But this was different. This was a danger built on psychological warfare, on strategic manipulation, on the exploitation of relationships. This was a war fought in shadows, not alleys. And Jason's involvement, his proximity, didn't shield Britt. It endangered her. A part of him wanted to ignore Brad's warning, to pull Britt closer instead of stepping back. But another part, the part forged through years of loss, knew Brad was right. And that realization tore at him with a force he hadn't felt in years. His emotional change, the shift Brad unintentionally forced upon him, went deeper than fear. It became a turning point, pushing him toward a choice that would redefine his path. Brad, for his part, felt the weight of what he had done. He knew Jason's silence wasn't anger, it was pain. Yet he also understood that this was the only way Britt could survive the tightening grip of Brennan and Sidwell. He wasn't trying to break them apart. He was trying to keep her alive. The conversation became the opening chapter of a new, darker arc. Jason would soon be forced to decide whether to honor Brad's plea or follow his own heart. And whichever choice he made would reshape the battlefield around Britt, pulling him deeper into a conflict he could no longer ignore. The adjustment in Brad's courage, the adjustment in Jason's heart, and the adjustment in Britt's fate all converged into a single truth. This was no longer just about love. It was about survival. And every step Jason took next would determine whether Britt escaped the storm or was swallowed by it. Liz and Jason found themselves standing in the kind of silence that only comes when two people know they are about to cross a threshold they cannot return from. It wasn't planned, this meeting, but it felt inevitable. The air between them carried the weight of too many unspoken fears, too many unsettling clues, and too many unanswered questions about the night Drew was shot. They had both been chasing fragments of truth separately, but now, finally, the lines of their investigation were intersecting, and neither of them liked what they were starting to see. Liz began carefully, laying out the details she had gathered. She spoke of inconsistencies in Willow's story, of strange emotional shifts, of the eerie tension that seemed to cling to her whenever Drew's name was mentioned. Jason listened with an intensity that would have intimidated anyone else. But Liz had known him too long to be rattled. She could tell the pieces in his mind were shifting, clicking into new positions. It was the same way he looked years ago when he solved a puzzle, before anyone else saw the picture forming. Jason, in turn, shared what he had discovered, subtle things, the kind that most people would ignore. He talked about the sound Kai and Trina heard the night of the shooting, the twinkle, twinkle, little star ringtone echoing through the hallway, a sound that shouldn't have been there. A sound that belonged to Willow's phoneth when she set specifically for Wiley's calls. He mentioned inconsistencies in Drew's account as well, details he claimed not to remember. An odd defensiveness, a growing desperation to shift suspicion elsewhere. Liz's breath caught, the pieces locked together with chilling clarity. This conversation marked one of the most significant adjustments in the unraveling mystery. A turning point in which speculation hardened into something dangerously close to confirmation. They both sensed it. The moment the truth crystallized in the air, heavy and undeniable, neither could brush it aside. The shooter wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random attacker. And it wasn't the person everyone was currently blaming. It was Willow. The realization struck Liz first, not as a shock but as a gradual, suffocating tightening. Willow, the quiet one. Willow, the gentle one. Willow, the one who loved Wiley with impossible devotion. How could she be the one who pulled the trigger? But the evidence, the timing, the motive, the ringtone stacked itself ruthlessly. Willow had been spiraling under the weight of Drew's lies, manipulated by Michael's secrets and consumed by her own desperation to hold her fractured family together. And desperation, Liz knew, could twist anyone into something unrecognizable. For Jason, the truth hit differently. He didn't feel disbelief, not at first. What he felt was the shift inside his own instincts. That cold protective instinct sharpening as danger revealed itself. He remembered Willow's face after the shooting, the tremble in her voice, the too careful answers. He had chalked it up to stress, fear, guilt over Drew's injuries. Now he could see the cracks were shaped differently. They were cracks made by someone who carried a secret too heavy to hold. Their conversation deepened, stretching into a careful dissection of every detail. They analyzed Drew's erratic behavior, Willow's distance, Michael's frantic attempts to redirect attention, and Nina's mounting unease. Each piece fit neatly into a pattern that now terrified them both. The truth wasn't just emerging, it was roaring to the surface, dragging a storm of consequences behind it. Liz's heart twisted when she realized what this meant. Willow wasn't just a suspect, she was spiraling into a new, far more dangerous kind of trouble. Once the truth was confirmed, once the authorities connected the same dots Liz and Jason had just connected, Willow would be facing more than exposure. She would be facing prosecution, family destruction, and the kind of public judgment that no one could survive intact. It was a vision of collapse that made Liz's stomach tighten. Jason, meanwhile, grappled with a different dimension of the fallout. If Willow was exposed, Drew would retaliate. Michael would implode. Nina would weaponize the truth. Sonny would be dragged into it whether he wanted to be or not. And worst of all, Wiley would be trapped in the center of the emotional wreckage. The chain reaction would tear apart half the city. This wasn't just a truth, it was a detonation. A new adjustment began taking shape in their minds, a heavy, inevitable shift that came once they accepted the reality in front of them. They could no longer treat this as rumor or suspicion. They needed a plan. They needed to act before someone else made a move. Before Willow did something even more irreversible. Liz took a slow breath. She could feel the fear radiating from somewhere deep in her chest, but she pushed it down. "We have to be careful," she said softly, and Jason nodded without hesitation. Being careful was the only way forward, not for their sake, but for Willow's, for Wiley's, for everyone who would be shattered if this truth came out the wrong way. The conversation between Liz and Jason became the quiet ignition point of a new chapter, a heavier one, a more dangerous one. It proved that the investigation had shifted from speculation to revelation, and that Willow's world was about to collapse if someone didn't intervene. And as they stood there, absorbing the weight of what they had uncovered, one reality became painfully clear. Willow wasn't just in trouble, she was standing at the edge of a disaster, and the truth was about to push her over. Sonny had been patient for far longer than anyone in Port Charles believed he was capable of being. But even patience had its limits, especially when it came to Avery's safety. The changes in Ava had started subtly at first, small shifts in her tone, her body language, the way she chose her words as if someone else were listening. Sonny noticed everything. He always had. But this time, the details were different. This time, the danger surrounding the mother of his child was not theoretical, it was growing, tightening, and becoming impossible for him to overlook. The more Ava interacted with Sidwell, the more Sonny felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came when a threat he couldn't fully see began inching closer to the people he loved. Sidwell was not a man who formed connections out of warmth or genuine affection. He was calculated, manipulative, and hungry for leverage. And Ava, who had survived men even more dangerous than him, was somehow slipping into his orbit, without seeing the full scope of the trap being laid around her. Sonny could accept Ava making questionable decisions for herself. She had a history of it, and she always paid the price in her own way. But he would not accept Avery being pulled into Sidwell's gravitational field. That was the line he refused to allow anyone to cross, not even Ava. And as the shifts in her behavior became increasingly undeniable, Sonny reached the point where he needed answers, not guesses, not excuses, not vague reassurances. The truth. The confrontation began quietly, but the tension beneath it felt ready to snap. Sonny asked her directly, even bluntly, if she had aligned herself with Sidwell, in ways she wasn't admitting. Ava tried to deflect, to laugh it off, to pretend that Sonny was overreacting. But Sonny didn't move. His stare stayed locked on hers, sharp and relentless, and Ava felt the air thicken between them. She could feel the accusation, the suspicion, the fear he was trying to hide beneath his controlled tone. The more Sonny pressed, the more the truth bled through. Ava had changed. She was defending Sidwell, justifying his behavior, speaking about him with a strange mix of admiration and intrigue. And Sonny recognized the pattern instantly. Sidwell had found a way in psychologically, emotionally, strategically. Ava liked to believe she was the one using him, but Sonny saw it differently. Sidwell was studying her, shaping her choices, pushing her to rely on him in small, almost invisible ways. This realization became one of the most significant adjustments in Sonny's thinking. A transformation so abrupt and powerful that he felt it settling into his bones. He wasn't just worried about Ava anymore, he was terrified. Terrified of what Sidwell was capable of. Terrified of how quickly Ava was being drawn into his world. Terrified of the moment Sidwell would use Ava's connection to Avery as leverage. And that fear, masked beneath Sonny's controlled expression, evolved into a new obsession. He needed to know why Ava was doing this. What Sidwell had told her. What he had promised. What he had threatened. He needed to know how deeply she was entangled. How far she had already gone. And whether she understood the danger she was dragging their daughter into. Ava tried to maintain composure, claiming that Sidwell was misunderstood. That he was powerful and useful. That she was simply navigating a dangerous world the way she always had. But Sonny wasn't buying it. The more she explained, the clearer it became. Ava wasn't just rationalizing her decisions, she was being influenced, shaped, pulled. The moment became a breaking point between them, marking a profound shift in their dynamic. Sonny realized Ava no longer saw the threat Sidwell represented. And Ava realized Sonny wasn't going to let this go, not when Avery's safety hung in the balance. This confrontation signaled a much deeper change in the storyline. One of those adjustments that altered the trajectory of everything connected to it. Sonny was no longer simply concerned. He was preparing to act. Ava was no longer simply careless. She was on the brink of being consumed. And Sidwell was no longer simply a problem. He was becoming the axis on which both their lives began to tilt dangerously. The air between Sonny and Ava crackled with the weight of unspoken fears and decisions yet to be made. Their exchange wasn't just a conversation. It was the beginning of a rupture. A shift that proved something was fundamentally breaking beneath the surface. Because Sonny didn't just want answers anymore. He needed them. And if Ava couldn't or wouldn't give them, Sonny knew he would have to dig for the truth himself. And when Sonny Corinthos dug, someone always paid the price.